Hi everyone, my name is Destiny, and in this week's module content, we have to find examples of discrimination and understand the discrimination impact in two videos that we had to watch. So I chose the woman from the Rosewood Institution as well as Sarah's video and her story. So starting off with Rosewood, an example of discrimination that I found inside of the article was, and I quote, "Once these fertile women were set free in the world, he reasoned, their mentally defective offspring became a new strain of civic pestilence." And to really break this down for you, it basically meant that individuals with mental disabilities were a threat to society because of their presumed hereditary traits, which basically meant being able to give their disability to their offspring or to their children. This helps really reinforce the idea of discrimination towards people with disabilities because the thought of having more mentally challenged people really infecting their town was scary to them. And so they would all agree to put these people inside of these institutions like Rosewood, quoting from the article again, "out of sight, out of mind." So you can only imagine the discrimination impact, and the discrimination impact that I see is the label of civic pestilence, and it's not only demeaning towards a human being but also denies people with disability of having any sort of parenthood experience. But by being okay with this treatment as society around them, it enriches to unleash harmful stereotypes against people with disabilities, really all of them, and it paves the way toward forced birth control or even invasive medical procedures that completely eliminate reproductive rights, which was actually an issue somewhere else in the world. I remember reading an article about it. The other quote that I had found from the article that expressed discrimination was, and I quote, "For more than 20 years, some of Baltimore's wealthiest and most established families had been helping themselves to institutionalize patients at Rosewood. They had been adopting these women and these children and these mentally challenged girls to turn them into their own private slaves." And what I mean by this is that they basically saw people with disabilities as a benefit towards themselves, and they basically made them do whatever they didn't want to do in their house. So anything from cooking, cleaning, working in the fields, housework, and other things like that. And they did it free of charge. They didn't pay them, and they probably kept them in the most minor, living conditions possible. The discrimination impact of this, that these individuals had a lower quality of life due to the hands of other people. They were a convenience and a financial benefit, and basically I would say considered disposable labor. They didn't have a chance to live the life at the level that everyone else does, and that's simply because they just had a disability, and they were considered unequal and a waste of space. So when you really put this into perspective, you think about the mentally challenged people and how confused they must have been when they really couldn't understand what was going on. And they were getting yelled at, because they didn't understand how to follow the directions and clean the toilet. And as a human, imagine how worthless they felt or misunderstood, which was an impact that went on for decades. And I can only imagine the fear that instilled into their friends, their family, and their children, if they even got to have any. And moving on to Sarah's story now. One example of discrimination I had found was being told that she had the job, but the employers that she was talking to stated that she needed to wait for the general manager to see if he approves of her because they need to make sure that, and I quote, "Lloyd doesn't have any issues with hiring someone like yourself." Moving on, he was basically stating that, they were basically instilling the fact that they needed to make sure that Lloyd didn't have an issue with hiring people with disabilities. And I guess the whole point of me trying to say that was they're seeing the disability before the individual. And she had all the right credentials. She had an amazing resume, but they were just reluctant to hire her because she had a disability. So the discrimination impact that I had thought of was psychological harm. And I would say psychological harm because that statement at the table and in the video, you can kind of see her reaction. it put fear into her and completely diminished her confidence because her resume was amazing. She really did feel like her disability got in the way of her job, and no one should ever feel like that. And like I had said before, no one else gets questioned about if the general manager would approve of you hiring, like, for him. It's really just unfair to Sarah. And then the second form of discrimination that I found in the video was them assuming that there would be problems down the line if Sarah would be hired because she has a disability, therefore leading to the manager needing reassurance that she is able to get her job done after the interview had gone great. So this is another prime example of assuming people with disabilities cannot do their job well without any issues. And I wanted to point this out because, again, no other employee that was hired at the company needed to reassure the general manager that they had the expertise needed that was already previously stated in the resume, that they were able to do their job, because they simply looked able-bodied and not disabled. So I believe that this discrimination impact established the barrier to equal employment opportunity. So while Sarah did end up getting the job in the end, it's rare for people with disabilities to even have a chance at an in-person interview. If this was the bias she felt in person, imagine the bias that was applied to her resume behind closed doors. And that's honestly the case for many that I've noticed, even with my friends. The idea of even needing reassurance that she could do her job correctly reinforced the idea that people with disabilities are looked at differently in the workforce, even by coworkers and hiring employers. So connecting all of this down to our module content, this week we're on the topic of legalities and discrimination, revolving around people with disabilities. So one of the readings that I had read in our module was the Guide to Disability Rights Laws, and that helped me a lot during this assignment. It talks about the ADA, and the part I want to focus on more was ADA Title I employment, which ties into Sarah's story. It basically says that the employment requires employers with 15 plus employees to provide equal opportunities for qualified individuals with disabilities in all employment related aspects. So it prohibits discrimination of all aspects of employment, which we could tell Sarah needed in that story. And even though the title is in place, it does still happen, as we saw, and we need to be aware of that and advocate to change. And also we need to be aware that we could actually report these agencies to like the government or the state for change, because it is in the policy. And then also to tie back into Rosewood, to refrain from that happening again, the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act authorizes the U.S. Attorney General to investigate conditions of confinement at government institutions, basically like the Rosewood Institution. And they go out, and it's specifically for individuals with disabilities to make sure that the conditions that they are living in is good, and it's better than good. It's not the bare minimum. So after the Rosewood incident, it's good to know that our government really tried to take accountability and put things in place for years of fighting for protection towards those with disabilities. And I understand why it's so important to stay educated about laws and policies now, because I didn't know about that act. And if I were to see something at an institution, I wouldn't know where to report it or how to report it, or even if I could report it. So it all really comes down to protecting people with disabilities' well-being if they cannot do it for themselves. So this was my personal take on the connections, the policies, and the overall assignment. And hopefully I got everything I wanted to say in here. Thank you.